He called her the cleaning lady, laughed while live streaming her humiliation to thousands, certain she didn't belong by the pool. But within minutes, his arrogance would detonate a secret she'd carried for 18 months. One that could topple corporations and expose human trafficking. Because the woman he'd tried to erase was CIA, and she was done staying silent. Before we continue this powerful story, let us know where you're watching from. If you like stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another powerful story that you won't want to miss. The pool glittered under the afternoon sun, a sheet of turquoise glass broken only by the gentle ripple of swimmers drifting lazily in the heat. It was the kind of place designed for perfect photographs, where luxury loungers sat lined in a perfect row and servers glided past with trays of cocktails that cost more than a week's rent. For most guests, this was paradise. For Zara Washington, it was supposed to be escape. She leaned back against the lounge chair, her body draped in a simple but elegant cover-up, a book in her hands. To anyone passing by, it looked like she was reading a novel, some harmless paperback to pass the hours. But tucked between the pages were briefing notes disguised in plain sight. Even on leave, her work was never far away. Beneath the sun hat and the quiet stillness, her mind was still a machine of observation. Every movement around her registered, every glance, every whisper. Her phone buzzed against the small table by her side. The screen lit up with a government code only she could decipher. She didn't move. She let it ring until it stopped, her hand brushing instead against the bottle of sunscreen resting next to it. For once, she told herself, she would ignore the call. For once, she would not be the agent, not be the one to answer. For once, she wanted to be invisible. 18 months undercover had left scars the sun could not heal. Long nights spent cultivating trust among criminals who would kill her without hesitation if they knew who she truly was. Endless days pretending to be someone she was not, breathing their air, listening to their cruelty, playing her role until she sometimes feared she would forget her own name. When the operation ended and she was ordered to take mandatory leave, she had packed her bags without argument. But rest had never come easily to her. Still, sitting by the pool, feeling the warm air kiss her skin, Zara tried to let the tension bleed away. The laughter of children echoed from the far end of the deck, the scent of chlorine mixed with coconut lotion. For a fleeting moment, she closed her eyes and pretended she was nobody. Not a doctor, not an agent, just a woman by a pool, reading a book, trying to breathe. But peace was never her luxury. It never lasted. The sound came first, a booming voice cutting across the lazy hum of conversation, the kind of voice that was used to being heard, to being obeyed. "Hey, cleaning lady." Her eyes snapped open. The words didn't land gently. They hit like a stone across the water, shattering the fragile stillness around her. Guests turned their heads toward the sound, curious. Some frowned, some smirked. The man's shadow fell across her, blotting out the sun. "You can't just help yourself to the pool after you finish the rooms. This isn't public housing." The contempt in his tone was thick enough to draw blood. Zara looked up slowly, her gaze traveling past the tailored swim trunks, the expensive watch gleaming on his wrist, until her eyes met his. Chad Brookfield. His expression was smug, already feeding off the attention he was drawing. Zara did not answer. She simply blinked once, her breathing slow, deliberate, her face a mask of calm that had carried her through interrogation rooms far more dangerous than this resort deck. Silence had always been her first weapon, but to men like Chad, silence was an invitation. "I'm talking to you." He leaned closer, snapping his fingers inches from her face as though she were a servant. "Pack up your little setup and get back to work. Real guests are trying to relax here." The words echoed. Conversations around the pool faltered, replaced by the soft shuffle of bodies turning to watch. A few phones were lifted, not openly yet, but discreetly. People sensed a performance beginning, and no one wanted to miss the show. Chad smirked, emboldened by the attention. He enjoyed the stage. Zara's fingers rested lightly on her book, the cover still open to the false novel wrapped around pages of classified print. Her training screamed at her to hold steady, controlled breathing, focus on the rhythm of her pulse, count the seconds if necessary, but inside a slow flame began to burn. It wasn't fear, it was the familiar sting of being reduced, dismissed, erased. Chad misread her stillness as weakness. He straightened, raising his voice. "You hear that, folks? Staff's making themselves comfortable where they don't belong. Management must be slacking if anyone can just claim a chair." His tone was pitched deliberately, carrying across the pool deck like a siren. Zara tilted her head slightly, studying him. The watch? Rolex. 45,000 at least. The sunglasses? Custom tinted. The stance? Aggressive, performative. He wanted an audience, and the crowd was feeding him. Phones began to rise higher now, no longer discreet. A young couple leaned forward, whispering. An older woman in a sun hat crossed her arms, lips pressed thin. Eyes, all of them, converged on her. Still, Zara said nothing. The silence only drove him further. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "You know what? If management won't handle this, I will." He tapped the screen, smirking into the camera as the little red light flicked on. "This is Chad Brookfield, presidential suite guest. I'm here at the Hamilton Resort pool, and you will not believe what I'm seeing." He tilted the phone so that the lens framed her face, lingering on her skin, her stillness, her lack of reaction. "Housekeeping staff using guest amenities like it's some public pool. Absolutely unacceptable. Security here is a joke." The comment started before he'd finished the first sentence. His friends, his followers, strangers, pulled in by the live stream notification, words scrawled across the screen in real time. "Good for you, Chad. Stand your ground. These people think they can go anywhere now." A ripple of laughter moved through a corner of the crowd, fueled not by humor but by the validation of shared prejudice. Zara's calm, once her shield, now made the cruelty sharper. They mistook it for shame. They mistook it for surrender. Zara's phone buzzed again on the small table beside her. The vibration hummed against the wood like a warning drumbeat. She didn't reach for it. She didn't break her pose. To do so now would give him what he wanted: reaction, emotion, proof that he had shaken her. Instead, she let the sound fade beneath the rising noise of Chad's performance. "Let me show you something, folks," Chad continued, angling the phone to capture the pool, the loungers, the pristine backdrop of wealth. "This is the Hamilton, one of the most expensive resorts in the state. And look right here, staff, just lounging like they paid for it. Unbelievable." He turned the phone back toward her, his finger pointing inches from her book. "See that? Relaxing like a guest. Maybe next she'll be ordering champagne on your dime. Tell me that's fair." The crowd tightened like a noose. A couple stood near the edge of the pool, whispering but keeping their phones up. A teenager leaned forward, grinning, his lens capturing everything for TikTok. Zara drew a long, measured breath. She had faced men who trafficked arms, men who traded lives like currency. She had listened to confessions of crime so vile they kept her awake for nights at a time. And still, something about this petty, entitled cruelty, burned differently. It wasn't just about her. It was about every assumption made against women who looked like her, every dismissal, every attempt to make them small. Her silence was armor, but even armor could feel heavy. Chad leaned closer again, his smirk widening. "Nothing to say? That's what I thought. They never do." He spoke not to her, but to the screen, to the scrolling comments that cheered his cruelty. His arrogance grew with every line of text flashing across his phone. "Don't worry, folks. I'll take care of it. Management will hear about this. I'll make sure she doesn't get away with it." He laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. To him, this was entertainment. To the crowd, it was spectacle. To the live stream audience, it was content. But to Zara, it was the beginning of something else entirely. The time was 2:31. She marked it silently in her head. 10 minutes, that was all it would take. She closed her book slowly, deliberately, sliding her thumb against the spine until the cover shut. For the first time, she lifted her eyes fully to meet his. Calm, dark, unblinking. The kind of eyes that had stared down men far more dangerous than Chad Brookfield could ever dream of being. And in that moment, the performance shifted. He didn't see it, not yet, but she knew the countdown had begun. The whispers began like small cracks in the stillness. Margaret Wheaton leaned toward her husband, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry across the lounge chairs around them. She was the kind of woman who wielded whispers like knives, sharp and deliberate. "She must be staff," she murmured, though every syllable was meant to be overheard. Her hand fluttered toward Zara like she was pointing out a misplaced piece of furniture. "I saw her earlier near the elevators, probably slipped down here after finishing her shift." Robert Wheaton, gray hair slicked back, nodded solemnly, as though he were weighing evidence in court. "Makes sense. Probably thought no one would notice. Some people think they can just sneak in anywhere these days." His tone carried that careful performance of authority, as if agreement itself conferred truth. Other guests caught the words, and soon the small murmurs spread like wildfire. A woman near the hot tub shook her head. "Shameful. Housekeeping taking liberties." A man in mirrored sunglasses smirked. "Guess the staff wants a taste of luxury too." Suspicion, once planted, grew roots quickly. The crowd seemed to close in invisibly, the air itself tightening with judgment. It wasn't enough for Chad's live stream to humiliate her. The whispers gave permission for others to pile on, each accusation becoming bolder, each assumption sharpening into certainty. Zara sat unmoving, every detail registering in her trained mind. Margaret's swimsuit, expensive but garish. Robert's performative nods, the ripple effect of their smug certainty infecting others. She had spent her career analyzing group dynamics, watching how fear and prejudice spread faster than truth. And here it was, unfolding in real time, just yards from her lounge chair. The whispers swelled, morphing into commentary meant for an audience. "Probably grabbed towels from a cart," someone said. "Bet she doesn't even have a key card." Laughter followed, not cruel in isolation, but cruel in accumulation. Phones tilted, catching not just Chad's broadcast, but their own little versions of the spectacle. A teenager smirked into his camera. "Yo, drama at the Hamilton Resort, old folks accusing some lady of sneaking in, stay tuned." Zara's breathing did not falter. Years of fieldwork had taught her to watch, to listen, to let the storm rise without reacting. But she marked the shift with quiet precision. The performance was no longer Chad's alone. It belonged to the crowd now. The resort pool was transforming into a stage, and she was the unwilling star. The resort's young security guard appeared next, summoned by murmurs and pointing fingers. Devin Mills was 23, maybe 24, his crisp uniform too new to hide the nerves in his step. He carried the small scanning device all guards were trained with, and though he tried to project professionalism, the tremor in his voice betrayed his unease. "Ma'am," he began, careful, respectful, though the weight of eyes around him pressed hard. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I've had some concerns raised by other guests. Could I see your room key, please?" Zara finally looked up at him, her gaze steady, her voice calm as glass. "Of course, Devin. But first, may I ask why I am the only guest here being asked for identification?" Her hand gestured subtly, gracefully, toward the rows of loungers around her. Couples reading magazines, men sipping drinks, families with towels draped across chairs, every one of them white. Not one approached, not one questioned. Devin shifted on his feet, eyes darting from her to the crowd. He knew the optics, knew how it looked, but the pressure of their stares burned into him. He had been on the job only a few months. Training had not prepared him for this. Chad's voice cut through before Devin could respond. "Because the rest of us actually belong here. Chad sneered, still clutching his phone, still narrating for the unseen audience on the other side of his screen. "We paid to be here. We're not trying to steal amenities we can't afford." A ripple of agreement hummed through the crowd. Margaret gave a theatrical nod. Robert folded his arms. Devin felt the tide pulling him, the unspoken demand that he prove himself by confronting her further. Zara's voice remained calm, unshaken. "Do you ask everyone for proof of belonging, Devin, or just the guests who look like me?" The question landed heavier than any accusation. For a moment, silence spread, and Devin's Adam's apple bobbed. He knew the answer. He knew she was right, but the pressure of so many eyes forced him forward. He swallowed hard, eyes down. "Ma'am, please, just your key." Zara let the quiet stretch, her gaze holding his, making him feel every ounce of the dilemma twisting inside him. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her bag. Her movements were measured, controlled, no sudden gestures that could be twisted into something else. Her hand brushed against her wallet, resting just long enough for him to glimpse the layered IDs behind the plastic sleeve. She pulled out the black magnetic card. Without a word, she held it toward him. Devin accepted the key card, his scanner beeping as it came alive in his palm. The moment hung heavy, every eye at the pool fixed on the tiny screen in his hand. The seconds ticked loud in Zara's mind, each one marking the escalation of an ordeal that had started as insult but was now spiraling into something larger. 2:31. Chad's livestream comments filled with encouragement. "Make her prove it. Bet it won't scan. She's stalling." The crowd leaned closer, their hunger for spectacle sharpening. The scanner beeped again, displaying the details in crisp letters. Presidential Suite 3001. Registered guest, Dr. Zara Washington, United States Government. Devin's eyes widened, his breath caught. His voice almost faltered. "Presidential Suite," he read softly, barely above a whisper. "Registered to Dr. Z, Washington." The words should have ended it, should have scattered the doubts, but silence only fueled the suspicion around them. Margaret's voice sliced through, loud, certain. "Anyone can fake that. Identity theft is everywhere. You can't honestly believe she belongs in that room." Robert nodded gravely, as if her words were fact. "Exactly. Probably some scam. They'll figure it out once they check deeper." Chad snatched the scanner from Devin's hands, lifting it toward his phone camera. "Identity theft, folks, I told you. Looks like she rigged the system. Government account, my foot. Anyone can fake a booking." His smirk flickered but held, propped up by the attention of hundreds watching live. 2:32. The crowd thickened, chairs scraping as more guests moved closer. Phones multiplied, each lens pointed at Zara like an accusation. Whispers turned into commentary, each voice trying to outdo the other. "I knew it. Look at her bag, too expensive for housekeeping. Bet she's scamming taxpayer money. She doesn't belong here." Zara closed her eyes for one long breath, steadying the storm inside her. She had been here before, though not at a pool. She had been the woman questioned, doubted, cornered. But this time, it was magnified by every phone, every whisper, every second ticking toward something inevitable. 2:33. The pool had transformed, no longer a place of rest. It was a theater, a courtroom, a stage. Zara in the center, accused by whispers, judged by strangers, recorded for an invisible jury of thousands online. Chad's voice rose again, triumphant. "You all see it. They think they can sneak in, take what we pay for, and when caught, they play victim. But not today, not while I'm here." The crowd murmured its approval, and still Zara sat in silence, her calm more unshakable than before. Because she knew what none of them could imagine. The countdown had only begun. The scanner beeped softly in Devin's hand, but the sound might as well have been thunder. His eyes darted from the tiny screen to Zara, then back again, disbelief widening his gaze. "Presidential Suite 3001. the most expensive accommodation in the resort, registered under the name Dr. Zara Washington, U.S. government account. Devon's throat went dry. He read the words quietly, almost to himself. Presidential Suite, 3001, registered to Dr. Washington. For a heartbeat, silence pressed down over the crowd. The certainty that had fueled the accusations cracked ever so slightly. But cracks invite panic, not humility. Chad lunged forward, snatching the scanner out of Devon's hand with an entitled speed that startled even him. He lifted the device, shoving it close to his phone camera so his live stream audience could see the display. The smirk on his face wavered, only for a moment, before he forced it back into place. "Identity theft is everywhere," he declared, his voice louder than before, desperate to recapture the momentum slipping from him. "Anyone can fake government reservations these days. You'd be shocked how easy it is to scam a hotel booking system." His words struck the air like nails on glass. Margaret Wheaton clutched her husband's arm, nodding. "Exactly," she said, her voice shrill. "Just because it's scanned doesn't mean anything. She doesn't look like the kind of person who belongs in a presidential suite." Robert added gravely, "The system can be manipulated. We've all read the stories. You have to be cautious with people like this." People like this. The phrase hung heavy, thick with the meaning they wouldn't dare say out loud. Phones tilted closer, cameras zoomed in. Devon's face flushed with shame. He knew what he had read. He knew it was true. But the weight of the crowd made truth feel fragile, as if certainty itself could be erased with enough noise. Zara didn't move. She sat perfectly still, her hands resting lightly on the closed cover of her book. Only her eyes shifted, following the desperate way Chad clung to the narrative he'd spun. She had seen this before. Men afraid to lose face, their pride more dangerous than their fists. She recognized the mask beginning to crack. 2:34. The seconds ticked in her mind like clockwork, each one pulling the tension tighter. She knew exactly how fast things could escalate, and she knew this performance, if left unchecked, could spiral into something irreversible. The crowd did not disperse after Devon read the truth aloud. Instead, suspicion thickened. Margaret raised her voice so that anyone nearby could hear. "Even if she has a key, do you really believe she earned it? Do you really think this resort caters to people like her?" Her words were carefully chosen, dripping with condescension, wrapped in politeness but sharpened to wound. Robert nodded in support, as though her prejudice had the weight of law. A teenager standing by the pool began broadcasting the scene on TikTok. "Drama at the Hamilton Resort, y'all," he narrated, his tone gleeful. "Lady caught using the pool, claims she's got the presidential suite. Let's see if it's true." Within seconds, viewers flooded his feed, laughing, commenting, choosing sides. The situation was no longer contained to the pool deck. It was spilling into living rooms, phones, and timelines across the country. The spectacle became bigger than the truth. Zara sat motionless, though inside she felt the storm rising. Racism, arrogance, the unchecked power of social media. It was all converging here, pressing against her fragile cover. Every lens aimed at her was another risk, another chance her true identity could be exposed before she was ready. Chad paced in front of her chair, still performing for his audience. "Look at this, folks," he said, turning the scanner toward the crowd. "Government account, presidential suite. Sounds impressive, right? But let's not be fooled. That's exactly how scammers trick good people. Fake credentials, fake bookings, and suddenly they're stealing taxpayer money to sit at our pools." His voice climbed with every sentence, as though sheer volume could force his words into truth. The crowd murmured agreement, their doubts feeding on one another until certainty hardened again. Zara felt the press of it against her chest, not fear, but pressure, the kind that reminded her of interrogation rooms, of men with weapons, convinced they held the upper hand. She had learned long ago that silence was its own form of power, but she also knew that silence in the face of arrogance could become gasoline poured over flame. Her phone buzzed again on the table beside her. The vibration rattled against the wood like a second heartbeat. She glanced down, her eyes catching the name on the screen. Director Martinez, the head of her division. She declined the call without hesitation, her hand lingering over the phone for just a moment longer than necessary. She could not break cover, not yet, not like this. 2:35. The crowd was swelling, people abandoning their loungers to circle closer. The pool had become an amphitheater, the air tight with judgment. Chad's smirk was slipping, but his voice remained loud, relentless, feeding his audience of hundreds online. Margaret and Robert nodded like loyal jurors. The boy with the TikTok feed grinned, unaware he was documenting something far bigger than he imagined. The pressure cooker was sealed, all it needed was heat. Zara exhaled slowly, letting the breath move through her body with the control of someone who had been trained to survive under pressure. She had endured worse than this. She had endured men who looked her in the eyes while planning violence against entire families. She had endured nights where one slip of the tongue could mean a bullet in her back. Compared to that, this should have been nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was a public execution of dignity, dressed in entitlement and broadcast live to strangers. It was prejudice sharpened into humiliation, multiplied by a crowd eager for spectacle. And the truth told that she was who she said she was, that she belonged here more than any of them, was being smothered beneath arrogance and lies. Her phone buzzed again, the screen flashing with the same name, Director Martinez. Urgency hummed with every vibration, each one a reminder of the fragile line she walked. To answer would be to shatter her cover in front of hundreds. To ignore it was to risk everything she had worked for. She let it buzz, then silenced it again. Chad caught the motion. His eyes lit up. "See that, folks? Phone keeps going off. Probably her friends, trying to back up her story. Classic scam tactic. They'll say anything to make it look real." His laugh rang harsh, forced. But the crowd chuckled nervously, clinging to his explanation because it was easier than admitting they had been wrong. Margaret's voice cut through again. "She can't possibly be legitimate. Look at her. Do you really think the State Department sends people like her to luxury resorts?" The words landed like poison. Zara's eyes lifted to hers, calm and unflinching. For the first time she spoke. Her voice was quiet, but every syllable was deliberate. "What exactly does someone like me look like, Mrs. Wheaton?" The question froze the air. Margaret's lips parted, but no answer came. Because the truth was clear. She hadn't meant government qualifications. She hadn't meant class. She had meant skin. The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation. Phones tilted closer. Comments scrawled faster. The crowd leaned in. For the first time, Chad's smirk faltered completely. Zara leaned back, her voice steady as stone. "You've mistaken my silence for weakness. Don't confuse the two." 2:36. The seconds ticked louder in her head, each one drawing the inevitable closer. She could feel the turning point approaching, the line where performance would meet revelation. She didn't want it yet. She wasn't ready, but the storm was no longer in her control. The mask on Chad's face cracked, his bravado slipping. But pride is a dangerous drug, and he wasn't ready to let it go. He tightened his grip on the phone, raised his voice higher, desperate to drown out the shift he felt but could not stop. And in that desperate noise, Zara sat steady, her calm heavier than his arrogance, her silence sharper than his words. The first sign of management came not from authority, but from panic. The crowd parted as Bryce Hamilton strode across the pool deck in his tailored navy suit, the kind of uniform that screamed wealth and corporate polish even in the suffocating heat. His forehead already shone with sweat, but his smile was wide and practiced, the kind designed to calm angry guests before bad reviews could spread online. "Good afternoon, everyone," he said, his voice carrying over the murmurs. "I'm Bryce Hamilton, General Manager. I understand there's been a bit of confusion here." Chad seized the moment instantly, stepping forward, phone still raised. "Finally," he announced to his live stream. "Management's here to handle this situation. "Sir, this woman has been using guest facilities without permission. When we asked her to leave, she became aggressive, started making threats. I've got it all on video." The crowd hummed, pleased to see their accusations gaining weight. Phones swung toward Bryce, eager to capture his response. Bryce's eyes moved quickly from Chad's expensive watch to Margaret's pointed glare, then finally to Zara, still seated. Still calm, he hesitated. She looked elegant, self-possessed. Her bag alone cost more than most people's cars. But appearances could be deceiving, and Bryce had built his career on knowing which side of a complaint to choose. Wealthy guests brought repeat business. Complaints meant calls from corporate, and corporate fear was a language Bryce understood better than truth. "Ma'am," Bryce said, turning his gaze down on Zara with a tone that was polite but condescending, "I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. Perhaps we could discuss this privately, in my office." Zara's head tilted slightly, her eyes steady. "Discuss what exactly?" Bryce blinked, the smile never faltering though it wavered beneath the surface. "Well, just standard protocols. Guest area usage guidelines. The kind of things best handled away from an audience." The audience bristled with anticipation. Margaret stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to feign discretion while ensuring her words carried. "We've been coming here for years, Mr. Hamilton. Standards have slipped. It's not the same level of exclusivity we're used to." Robert added gravely, "If this is how the resort is being managed, I'm not sure we'll be renewing our membership." The message was clear. To side with Zara would mean risking loyal, paying clients. To side with Chad and Margaret meant preserving appearances. Bryce's decision was obvious. "Ma'am," he said again, his tone sliding from polite to dismissive, "if you would follow me to my office, we can sort this out quietly." Before Zara could respond, Devin Mills stepped forward. The young security guard still held the scanner, his hands trembling, but his voice carried something braver than his nerves. "Sir, her reservation shows she's staying in the presidential suite. That's our most expensive room. It's registered under a government account." Reese's jaw tightened. Devin wasn't following the script. He was supposed to stand back and let management control the situation. Instead, he was complicating it in front of dozens of witnesses and hundreds online. "Devin," Bryce said through his teeth, still smiling for the cameras, "thank you for your diligence, but we'll handle this internally." "But, sir." "Enough!" The word cracked like a whip. Bryce's smile sharpened as he turned back to Zara. "Now, ma'am, if you would just accompany me, we'll get to the bottom of this." The crowd read the cue instantly. Bryce's alignment with Chad gave their prejudice a new spine. They leaned in, whispering, nodding, their confidence swelling. Margaret whispered to a neighbor, "See? Management knows. She doesn't belong here." Robert folded his arms tighter, certain now that the resort's authority stood with them. Chad grinned, triumphant. He lifted his phone toward his own face. "You heard it, folks. Even management agrees. We can't let fraud slide in a place like this." His livestream comments surged with approval. "Knew it. Classic scammer move. She's toast." Zara's eyes narrowed slightly. Her calm never cracked, but beneath the surface, a sharper edge began to form. "You're obstructing a federal employee, Mr. Hamilton," she said evenly. For the first time, Bryce's smile faltered. Only slightly, but enough for Zara to see the shift. He recovered quickly, brushing a hand against his suit jacket as though smoothing the wrinkle her words had caused. "Ma'am, no one here is obstructing anything. We're simply trying to resolve a situation in the most professional manner possible." "You're attempting to remove me from a public space where I belong," Zara replied. Her voice was measured, each word chosen with surgical precision. "And you're doing it in front of dozens of witnesses. If you understood the weight of what you're suggesting, you'd stop." A ripple went through the crowd, uncertainty breaking through the smug certainty for the first time. But Chad's voice filled the gap quickly. "She's bluffing. Listen to her, throwing around big words, trying to intimidate us. Federal employee? Please. If she really worked for the government, She wouldn't be wasting her time at a pool. Margaret laughed, brittle and sharp. Exactly, the arrogance of pretending to be something you're not. The tension thickened. The crowd leaned closer. Phones hovered inches from faces. The pool was no longer a place of leisure. It was a trial. Bryce tried again, his voice carefully balanced between authority and appeasement. Let's not turn this into more than it needs to be. If you'll just come with me, we'll get this cleared up. Zara didn't move. She sat perfectly still, eyes locked on his. A statue, carved of steel and patience. Her silence was no longer passive, it was defiance. Sir, Devon said again, more urgently this time. Her credentials are legitimate. You saw the scan yourself. Why are we questioning this? Bryce shot him a look that could cut stone. Devon, you're out of line. But Devon didn't step back. His voice shook, but it carried conviction. No, sir. What's out of line is targeting one guest out of dozens because of how she looks. If she were anyone else sitting here, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. The words hung in the humid air like thunder before lightning. A few in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, their certainty rattled by the young guard's courage. Chad scoffed loudly. Don't fall for it, kid. She's playing you. This is how these people operate. Lies, scams, fake cards. You'll regret defending her. Devon turned toward him, his jaw tight. With respect, sir, I don't take orders from guests. My job is to enforce fairness, and right now, what I'm seeing doesn't look fair. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The guard had spoken truth to both power and prejudice, and the moment crackled with tension. Bryce's smile shattered completely now, his mask of composure slipping. Devon, Bryce snapped. You're dismissed. Go back to your post. I'll handle this. The young man hesitated, his fists clenching at his sides, but the weight of hierarchy pressed him down. Shoulders tight, he stepped back, though his eyes never left Zara. Zara turned her gaze back to Bryce, her voice quiet but sharp enough to cut through the chaos. You've aligned yourself with arrogance and ignorance, Mr. Hamilton. And you've done it in front of an audience you can't control. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen. Director Martinez. The call flashed like a beacon, urgent, unrelenting. She silenced it once more, her decision heavy but necessary. Not yet. 2:37. The crowd pressed closer. Phones swayed like torches. Chad's commentary grew more aggressive, Margaret's whispers more venomous, Robert's nods more theatrical. And Bryce, the man in charge, stood sweating in his suit, clinging to the wrong side of history while the truth simmered just beneath the surface, ready to explode. The hum of voices broke suddenly as two figures in uniform stepped onto the pool deck. Officer Elena Martinez, steady and sharp-eyed, moved with the calm authority of someone used to cutting through chaos. At her side walked Officer Daniel Chen, younger, his posture alert, his gaze sweeping over the crowd as if cataloging every face. The sight of uniforms brought a hush that lasted only a moment before the murmurs surged louder. Chad saw his chance and rushed forward, phone still raised like a weapon. "Officers, thank God you're here," he said breathlessly, angling the camera to capture both their faces. "This woman is trespassing. She's been using guest amenities without permission, and when we asked her to leave, she got aggressive. She even threatened us with legal action. Pretending she works for the government. I've got everything on video." The words spilled out quickly, crafted to sound measured but edged with urgency. Chad's voice carried the practiced tone of someone who had always been believed, someone confident that authority would tilt his way. The crowd nodded and murmured their support. Margaret clutched her husband's arm tightly, her voice carrying over the water. "It's true. She's been sitting here like she owns the place. We've been coming here for years and never seen anything like it." Officer Martinez lifted a hand, silencing the chorus for the moment. Her eyes settled on Zara, who still sat perfectly composed, her book resting in her lap, her expression unreadable. "Ma'am," Martinez said, her tone even but cautious, "would you please stand up?" Zara rose slowly, gracefully, every movement deliberate and unthreatening. She had been trained for moments like this, to move with calm clarity even when surrounded, her eyes locked on Martinez's, respectful but unyielding. "Could I see some identification?" Martinez asked. Zara reached for her wallet. She pulled out a California driver's license, the most ordinary form of proof she carried. She handed it over without hesitation. Before Martinez could examine it closely, Chad's voice cut in, sharp and loud. "Wait a minute. I saw more in there. She's got multiple IDs. That's what scammers do. She's hiding something." Phones tilted closer, capturing the exchange. The crowd shifted, their certainty swelling again. Multiple IDs. The phrase carried weight, a suggestion of fraud that spread quickly through murmurs. Officer Chen stepped slightly closer, positioning himself between Zara and the more aggressive onlookers. His presence was steady, but his eyes flicked toward Martinez, waiting for her lead. Martinez studied the license, then looked at Zara again. Her face was calm, but her phone, buzzing insistently on the small table beside her, drew her attention. The screen flashed once more with an unfamiliar but authoritative name. Chen noticed the glance, but it was Martinez whose eyes lingered. Something about the repeated calls unsettled her. Chad's commentary grew louder, his phone camera capturing every hesitation. "You see that, folks? Even the officers are suspicious. She can't even explain why she's carrying multiple IDs. This is what I was saying all along. She doesn't belong here." Margaret added fuel, her tone sharp with indignation. "Exactly. Look at how long this is taking. If she really belonged here, this would have been settled in seconds. But no, she has to drag it out, make excuses. It's insulting to the rest of us who pay to be here." The crowd murmured their approval, a tide that seemed to grow heavier with every word. Social media picked up the energy as well, Chad's livestream audience swelling into the hundreds, then thousands. The comments scrolled too quickly to read fully, but fragments flashed across the screen. "She's lying. Classic scam. Kick her out." Zara stood still, her gaze steady on Martinez, her breathing controlled. Inside, her pulse beat harder. Every second mattered. Every word spoken by the crowd tightened the noose. But silence, her silence, was still her weapon. Martinez studied the driver's license again, flipping it in her hand, running her thumb along the edges as though testing its authenticity. It looked valid. Everything about it checked out. Yet doubt clung stubbornly. Government bookings, presidential suites, multiple IDs. Nothing about this situation was simple. "Do you have any other identification?" Martinez asked at last, her voice even but probing. Zara's eyes flickered for the briefest moment. She had hoped to avoid this. Her wallet contained layers of her life: driver's license, medical credentials, federal IDs. To show them all now, here, under the gaze of a crowd and countless phones, was dangerous, but to refuse would deepen suspicion. She opened the wallet again, careful, deliberate. The edge of a blue diplomatic card glimmered behind the plastic. Another ID showed the eagle crest of federal clearance. Martinez caught sight of them before Zara slid the wallet closed again, pulling out only her medical credentials this time. "Dr. Zara Washington," Martinez read softly, eyes flicking to Zara's calm face. "Stanford address, age 38. Chad pounced again, his voice sharp. "See? Multiple identities. Doctor, government, whatever she feels like being today." "This is exactly what I warned about." His livestream comments surged. "Multiple IDs equals fraud. She's busted. Get her out." The pool had become a courtroom, the crowd its jury, the live stream its executioner. And yet, even as the accusations swirled, Zara's phone buzzed again. This time, the name on the screen flashed clearly: Martinez, CIA director. The irony wasn't lost on her. She declined the call once more, but not before Officer Martinez caught a glimpse of the screen. Her brow furrowed. The crowd leaned forward, sensing the hesitation. To them, hesitation was guilt. Every second Martinez spent examining the IDs, every flicker of doubt on her face fed their certainty. Phones rose higher, capturing every angle. The hashtag appeared first in Chad's comments, then spread like wildfire. Pool Patrol. Chad repeated it into his phone with glee. Hashtag Pool Patrol, folks. Keep it trending. We're not letting this go until management gets rid of her. His audience responded instantly, the phrase exploding across feeds. The murmurs became chants of certainty. She doesn't belong here. Fake. Scammer. Margaret's voice rose again, sharp as a blade. It's insulting that we even have to stand here and argue. This resort is supposed to be exclusive, and now we're wasting our time on fraud. Martinez felt the weight of eyes not just at the pool, but on the screens broadcasting live. One wrong move, and her decision would be scrutinized by thousands. Chin shifted uncomfortably at her side, aware of the tension climbing with every second. Zara remained motionless, her stillness now a form of defiance. She let them circle, let them hurl their accusations. But her silence wasn't surrender. It was the only shield she could afford until the moment she chose to break it. Inside, though, she felt the tightening noose. The arrogance of Chad, the venom of Margaret, the indecision of Bryce, the hesitation of Martinez, the roar of social media. It was all converging at once, threatening to rupture her cover before she was ready. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't silent. The vibration rattled against the wood of the small table, the screen glowing bright. CIA Director Martinez. The name was visible to anyone close enough to glance. Officer Martinez noticed again, her brows knitting tighter, suspicion shading into something else. Recognition, maybe. Or fear. The crowd didn't notice the detail. They saw only the pause, the buzzing phone, the silence stretching longer. To them, it was confirmation, guilt dressed as calm. Chad grinned into his phone. There you have it, folks. She can't answer because she knows she's caught. She's been stalling from the start. His comments surged with agreement, the chorus growing louder, feeding itself. 2:38. The air felt electric, heavy with judgment, with arrogance, with the dangerous mix of truth and lies colliding in the open. Zara lifted her chin slightly, her eyes steady, her posture unbroken. She knew the storm was only moments from breaking, and when it did, the world watching would never be the same. The buzz of Zara's phone rattled against the table again, louder this time, pulling Officer Martinez's eyes toward it. The glowing name on the screen was impossible to ignore. Director Martinez. The title alone carried weight, a signal of authority far beyond the reach of this poolside spectacle. But the crowd saw none of that. They saw only hesitation. And hesitation had already been rewritten as guilt. Chad smirked into his phone camera, his voice rising triumphantly. She's been stalling for 15 minutes. Can't prove anything. Keeps pretending to be someone she's not. I told you all from the beginning, she doesn't belong here. Margaret folded her arms tightly, her expression sharp with certainty. If she really had anything legitimate to show, she would have done it by now. This charade has gone on long enough. Zara finally moved. She bent slowly, picked up her phone, silenced it, and set it carefully back on the table. Her hands remained visible, calm, deliberate. Then she turned her gaze directly on Chad, her eyes steady as stone. "Mr. Brookfield," she said, her voice even but cutting through the air like a blade, "you have been recording me without my consent. You have made multiple accusations, each baseless, each rooted in assumption. And now you are broadcasting this to an online audience." Chad tilted his phone closer, smirking again. Exactly. Transparency. The people have a right to know when someone's trying to scam the system. Her head tilted slightly, a small motion, but her words dropped with weight. Broadcasting classified identification is a federal crime, and that is exactly where this will lead if you don't stop. The crowd stiffened. A ripple of unease moved through the air. Even Chad faltered, his smirk slipping for the briefest moment. "Classified?" he repeated, trying to force a laugh. "Nice bluff. What, you gonna say you're CIA next?" Zara did not blink. Yes. The single word cut the pool deck in half. Phones froze mid-air. Murmurs died instantly. Officer Martinez's brow furrowed deeper, her grip tightening around the license still in her hand. Chin's jaw shifted, his eyes narrowing as though testing the weight of the claim. And for the first time, Chad's laughter caught in his throat. Zara's movements were slow, deliberate, the kind of controlled precision that came from years of knowing one wrong gesture could mean death. She reached into her wallet again, sliding free a card unlike the others. Navy blue, embossed with gold lettering, layered with holographic seals that shimmered in the sun. Even from a distance, the details radiated authority. She held it out calmly. Central Intelligence Agency. Dr. Zara Washington, Senior Intelligence Analyst. Clearance level TSCI, polygraph current. Officer Martinez accepted the card with trembling hands. She read the words aloud softly, her voice barely carrying over the pool. But to the crowd, it might as well have been thunder. Central Intelligence Agency. The words cracked every assumption that had fueled the last half hour. Gasps rippled outward, sharp and sudden. Phones tilted higher, their cameras zooming to capture every detail. Chad's live stream comments exploded, the mocking tone replaced with disbelief. "Wait, is this real? CIA? No way. This can't be happening." Chad's face drained of color. His smirk, once welded to his skin, collapsed completely. His phone trembled in his grip, though he tried to steady it. This is fake," he stammered, but his voice had lost its conviction. "Anybody can print a card. That doesn't mean anything." Zara's eyes locked on his, calm and unblinking. TSCI stands for Top Secret, Sensitive Compartmented Information. It is the highest level of clearance granted to civilian personnel in this country. It is not a credential that can be faked on a printer. It requires years of service, countless investigations, and polygraph verification. What you are filming right now is classified information, and if you continue, you are committing a federal crime. The words dropped into silence. Martinez's fingers tightened around the ID. She had been an officer long enough to recognize when credentials were beyond her pay grade. Chen leaned closer, his eyes wide. "This is real," he whispered. The crowd shifted uneasily, their certainty fractured. Margaret's face drained of its smug assurance. Robert's arms slowly uncrossed. The murmurs grew scattered, no longer confident, now edged with disbelief and fear. And Chad, still holding his phone aloft, found himself no longer the hero of a live stream, but the villain of a breaking story. His voice shook as he tried to recover. If you're CIA, then what are you even doing here? At a pool? At this resort?" Zara's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. "Working." The single word landed like a hammer. Working. The crowd exchanged nervous glances, each guest silently reevaluating every assumption made over the last half hour. Zara straightened her shoulders, her voice carrying with clinical clarity. "For the last 18 months, I have been embedded in operations designed to uncover human trafficking networks. Networks that operate quietly, invisibly, through the very places you believe are untouchable. Luxury resorts, properties like this one." Gasps swept across the deck. Margaret stumbled back a step, her hand tightening on Robert's arm. "That's ridiculous," she muttered, but her voice lacked force. Zara's gaze moved across the gathering, calm but unrelenting. "It is not ridiculous. It is systematic. Wealthy properties like this are ideal for laundering money, hiding movement, and disguising exploitation as hospitality. For 18 months, I have tracked financial flows, monitored shell companies, and documented victims forced into servitude under the guise of staff." Her eyes turned toward Devon, the young guard who still hovered near the edge of the crowd. You've seen them, haven't you? The housekeepers who never speak, who never leave the property, who live in conditions no guest ever notices? Devon's eyes widened, his voice catching. Yes, he said quietly. I thought it was strange. They always looked scared. I didn't know what it meant. Zara gave a single nod. It meant exactly what you thought it did. And now, because of one man's arrogance, this investigation has been compromised. Her gaze swung back to Chad, her eyes sharp as steel. Because you could not imagine that I belonged here, you broadcast my face to the world, and in doing so, you may have endangered victims I have spent 18 months trying to protect. The words hit harder than any accusation. Chad's lips parted, but no words came. His live stream audience surged into the thousands, comments flashing across the screen. He's done. This is insane. He ruined everything. The crowd itself had shifted. No longer smug, no longer mocking, they now stood in stunned silence, the weight of revelation pressing against them. Margaret's eyes darted around nervously, her confidence shattered. Robert swallowed hard, his earlier certainty collapsing under the weight of evidence. Even Bryce Hamilton, the general manager who had stood so firmly against Zara minutes ago, had paled visibly, sweat dripping down his temples as he processed the implications. Zara's voice was calm, almost clinical. The resort itself is implicated. The transactions have already been traced. The evidence is undeniable. And now, the eyes of this entire crowd and the thousands watching live have witnessed the truth. Her phone buzzed again. She silenced it without looking away from Chad. Her gaze was steady, her voice low but unshakable. Your live stream began as entertainment, Mr. Brookfield. Now, it is evidence. The resort pool, once filled with laughter, chatter, and the splash of children, had gone silent. The faint hum of distant engines grew louder until it became unmistakable. Black SUVs rolled up the circular drive in formation, their tinted windows reflecting the afternoon sun. Doors swung open, and men and women in dark suits stepped out with practiced efficiency. The badges they carried were unmistakable: FBI, Department of Justice, Homeland Security. The crowd gasped, instinctively stepping back, as if the sudden presence of federal agents had transformed the pool deck into forbidden ground. Yellow tape appeared as if conjured from nowhere. A resort once meant for leisure now looked like a crime scene. Chad's live stream still ran, his phone trembling in his hand as the comments section exploded. Thousands of viewers, now tens of thousands, were watching agents stream past him, weapons at their sides, earpieces in their ears. The smugness drained from his face completely. Bryce Hamilton, the general manager, stepped forward, sweat pooling beneath his collar, his practiced hospitality smile faltering with every breath. There must be some misunderstanding, he began, his voice high and desperate. This is a private establishment, a place of relaxation for our guests. Surely there is no need for... He was cut short by a voice of calm authority. We have probable cause. Stand aside. Zara stood tall, no longer the isolated woman at the center of ridicule, but the commanding presence around which everything now revolved. She gestured toward Bryce with precision. This is Bryce Hamilton, the general manager. For the last 18 months, financial records have shown repeated anomalies tied directly to this property. Cash transfers to shell corporations, expense reports that cannot be reconciled, and undocumented staff rotations designed to keep labor invisible. The lead FBI agent, a woman in a dark blazer with steel-gray eyes, nodded and turned toward her team. Secure the office. Bring in the files. Get his devices. Bryce raised his hands, his voice cracking. I don't know what you're talking about. I just run the resort. I don't handle... Zara's voice cut clean through his protest. The shell corporations funnel money through offshore accounts tied directly to guest expenditures. Every time a payment was marked for maintenance or catering, it was laundered. And those rotations you signed off on? They were cover for trafficking victims moved from one property to another. The crowd staggered under the weight of her words. What had begun as an afternoon argument by the pool was now unraveling as a sprawling federal case. Agents swarmed the deck, cording off entrances, escorting confused guests to one side while others began taking statements. The once jeering vacationers now whispered among themselves, their voices filled with fear rather than scorn. Phones lowered, hands shook, and even Chad had finally ended his live stream, terrified of what more it might capture. Bryce Hamilton was no longer the composed executive who had dismissed Zara hours before. He was pale, his hands trembling as an agent pressed him for answers. His voice wavered, his words stumbling over each other. "Look, I didn't know the full extent. I was told these were investors, silent partners. I was told the staffing arrangements were normal for luxury properties." The agent's expression didn't change. "Normal staff do not arrive without passports. Normal staff do not live in locked quarters beneath the property. You signed every approval." Bryce's voice dropped to a whisper, desperation leaking through every syllable. "Please, if I cooperate, if I give you the names, the accounts, the people higher up than me, can I get leniency?" The bargaining had begun, and everyone watching could hear it. The general manager, who once believed himself untouchable, was now pleading for mercy in the open air of his own poolside lounge. Zara watched silently, her posture unyielding. She had seen this before, the moment when arrogance collapsed under the pressure of exposure. She stepped closer, her voice steady and deliberate. "Every name, every transaction, every property, you will hand it over. But understand this, Bryce. Leniency will not erase what you signed. You chose profit over people, and now everyone knows." The weight of her words hung heavy, but it was not the end. A new voice pierced the silence, one that no one expected. "I can help with that." The crowd turned. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who had been dismissed earlier as nothing more than a nuisance, stepped forward with surprising steadiness. Her cane clicked against the pavement as she moved closer, her lined face set with quiet resolve. 18 months ago, she began, I noticed something wrong. Housekeepers who were suddenly replaced without warning, young women who looked too frightened to speak, maintenance staff who never once left the property. I tried to tell someone, but no one would listen. So I started writing it all down. Gasps rose again, softer this time but no less charged with electricity. Mrs. Patterson reached into her oversized handbag and withdrew a weathered folder, thick with paper. She handed it to the nearest agent with a firm grip, her voice unwavering. Every shift change, every unfamiliar name, every door locked at odd hours. I kept records, dates, times, faces. I may not have known exactly what was happening, but I knew it wasn't right. The lead agent flipped through the folder, eyebrows rising as page after page revealed meticulous notes. Cross-referenced dates, guest lists, even diagrams of staff quarters drawn in steady pen strokes. She looked back at the elderly woman with newfound respect. This is incredible. You've been documenting this for 18 months? Mrs. Patterson nodded once. When no one believes you, the only thing you can do is make sure the truth can't be ignored. I was dismissed, laughed at, told I was imagining things. But I wasn't. And now, maybe this will mean those people don't stay invisible forever. The crowd that had once mocked Zara now turned to Mrs. Patterson with stunned silence. The elderly woman, overlooked and underestimated, had become the keeper of the receipts. Her words carried the weight of both wisdom and moral authority, cutting sharper than any badge or credential. Rice collapsed into a nearby chair, his head in his hands. The folder in Mrs. Patterson's possession was the nail in the coffin. It meant his denials could no longer stand. Agents surrounded him, pressing for details, their pens scribbling furiously. His bargaining lost its teeth now that someone else had the evidence to bury him. All spoke of defeat, only the fear of his deadlines to bury him. Zara stepped closer to Mrs. Patterson, her expression softening. For the first time that day, gratitude replaced steel in her eyes. "You've done more than you realize," she said gently. "Documentation like this can unravel an entire network. What you risked, what you endured, it matters. Mrs. Patterson gave a small smile, her eyes glistening but proud. All I ever wanted was for someone to see, someone to care. I never thought it would be the CIA standing here. Around them, the pool deck buzzed with the energy of revelation. Federal agents moved with purpose, gathering files, seizing devices, escorting staff for questioning. Guests whispered in shock, their vacation paradise revealed as a crime scene of unimaginable scale. And at the center of it all stood two women, one young, armed with credentials and authority, the other elderly, armed with persistence and pen strokes, together pulling truth from the shadows. The storm had come, and it was only beginning. The east wing of the resort had always been marketed as under renovation. Guests were told it was being refurbished for an exclusive luxury upgrade, a reason for locked doors and covered windows. But as the agents swept in with flashlights and tactical precision, the truth was revealed. Hallways that should have been filled with cleaning supplies and paint buckets instead smelled of fear and confinement. Agents moved door to door, unlocking makeshift locks and prying open hidden compartments. Behind the first door, a gasp broke through the silence. Inside sat three women, huddled together, their eyes wide with terror, their clothes rumpled and ill-fitting. They flinched at the sound of the door breaking open, unsure if the figures in dark suits meant safety or more danger. "It's okay," one of the female agents said softly, lowering her weapon and extending her hand. "You're safe now. We're here to help." The women did not move at first. Trauma had trained them to mistrust promises. But when the agent stepped forward and draped her jacket around the shoulders of the nearest girl, something shifted. The girl, barely more than 19, began to sob, clutching at the fabric as if it were a lifeline. Room after room revealed the same horror. In total, 12 women were found in the East Wing, each one bearing the marks of captivity. Some were malnourished, their frames frail. Others had bruises that spoke of recent violence. All of them carried the same expression, eyes dulled by months of silence, yet flickering with the fragile spark of hope. When the women were escorted onto the pool deck, the crowd fell completely silent. These were no longer abstract accusations or distant rumors. These were human beings, flesh and blood, who had been hidden in plain sight while guests sipped cocktails a few feet away. Bryce Hamilton covered his face with his hands, his final defense crumbling. Chad lowered his phone, unable to twist what everyone could now see. Even the officers, hardened by years of policing, struggled to keep their composure as the women were led to safety. Zara moved forward slowly, her voice quiet but steady. "You are safe now," she told them. "No one here can hurt you again." The women looked at her, still unsure if they could believe it. And then, slowly, one of them stepped forward to speak. Her name was Maria Santos, and her voice carried the weight of 18 months of terror. She stood trembling, supported by the agent beside her, but when she spoke, her words cut through the silence like glass. "They told us we were being hired for resort work. They promised money to send home, promised a safe place to stay, but the moment we arrived, our passports were taken. They said if we tried to leave, our families would be hurt. Every time we spoke up, we were punished. Every time someone new came in, we were told to keep quiet, to smile when staff checked on us." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The bystanders who had mocked Zara earlier now stared at the ground, shame written across their faces. Guests who once believed themselves innocent bystanders now realized they had been neighbors to suffering and said nothing. Maria's voice broke, but she pressed on. "We were moved from place to place, always luxury hotels, always behind locked doors. We heard whispers about buyers, about people who came not for vacation but for us. Some of the girls, they disappeared. We never saw them again." The words landed like a hammer. A mother in the crowd pulled her child closer, horrified at the thought of such cruelty hidden beneath a facade of wealth and leisure. Phones that had once recorded for mockery now recorded for truth. The live stream, capturing the confession of a survivor, who refused to stay invisible any longer. Zara stepped toward Maria, her voice low and respectful. "You do not have to share more unless you want to. What you have done already is powerful." Maria shook her head, tears spilling down her face. "I need to, because no one believed us, and if I stop now, it will feel like I am still trapped in those rooms." Her courage spread like wildfire among the others. A second young woman spoke of beatings when she refused to smile. Another described being forced to work long hours in kitchens under the guise of employment while being forbidden to leave at night. Each testimony added to the growing picture of systemic abuse, the facade of paradise ripped away layer by layer. The crowd wept openly now. No one mocked, no one laughed. The weight of human suffering had replaced every ounce of arrogance that had filled the air hours before. The agents moved swiftly to provide comfort: blankets, bottled water, gentle words spoken in hushed tones. Medical staff arrived, checking vitals and taking notes, assuring the women that they would be taken to a safe location where doctors and counselors would tend to them. But more important than any clinical procedure was the validation in the air. The recognition that these women were no longer shadows. For the first time in months, maybe years, they were being treated as human beings whose voices mattered. Zara knelt before the group, her knees pressing against the cool stone of the pool deck. Her tone shifted from authority to compassion, every word carrying weight. "You are no longer evidence. You are no longer prisoners. You are people, and you matter. You will not be silenced again." Maria met her eyes, and for the first time, the haunted tension in her face softened. She nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly, and reached for the hand of the woman sitting beside her. That single gesture, fragile and deliberate, was a spark of solidarity. Survival had already bound them together, but this was something different. It was the beginning of healing. Around them, the entire story had transformed. Hours earlier, this pool had been filled with mockery, with laughter aimed at Zara's calm defiance. Now, every face was turned toward the women who had been hidden away, their testimonies breaking open the illusion of luxury. Guests who had rolled their eyes and whispered cruel jokes now held their hands over their mouths, the weight of shame written into their expression. Phones that had once streamed Zara's humiliation now streamed the opposite. Every camera captured the raw humanity of the moment, survivors holding each other, trembling but unbroken, agents moving with care, and Zara's unwavering presence at the center of it all. The spectacle had become a reckoning, and the nation was watching. Bryce Hamilton slumped in his chair like a man hollowed out from the inside. His carefully crafted mask of professionalism had collapsed, and there was no bargain strong enough to erase what the cameras had already captured. Chad's phone dangled at his side, his signature smirk replaced with wide-eyed disbelief. The crowd that had once applauded his arrogance now looked at him with open disgust, as though finally seeing the cowardice that had always been hiding behind his wealth. And yet the focus never left the women. One began to cry quietly, the tears rolling down her cheeks as if her body had only just been given permission to release the pain. Another reached for an agent's hand, gripping it as though afraid she might slip back into the nightmare if she let go. Their tears were not just symbols of trauma. They were proof of survival, of voices returning after months of silence. Zara placed her hand gently on Maria's shoulder, grounding her. Her words were quiet but firm, each syllable carrying the weight of a promise. "You are safe now. No one in this place will touch you again." The women wept, not from fear this time, but from relief. Their sobs rose and fell like waves, an emotional release that swept across the deck and into the crowd. Those who had once stood as spectators now stood as witnesses, unable to look away from the truth unraveling before them. The resort itself seemed to change under the weight of revelation. The shimmering pool, once a backdrop for leisure, reflected the flashing lights of federal vehicles. The manicured landscaping looked more like camouflage for a crime scene than a paradise. What had been marketed as a luxury escape was now exposed as a fortress of lies, its walls holding secrets too dark to ignore. For the rescued women, it was where their chains were broken. For the watching world, it was where denial ended and accountability began. The aftermath would be long, painful, and complicated. Trauma does not dissolve in a single night, nor do systems of power crumble easily. But this moment mattered. This moment was the hinge upon which the story turned, the first step toward healing for the women, the first crack in the armor of corruption, and the beginning of a reckoning that could no longer be contained. The raid had ended, but the storm that followed shook the foundations of power far beyond the walls of the resort. Within hours, markets reacted. News anchors filled screens across the country with the story of how a paradise getaway was actually a hub of human trafficking and financial crime. The resort's parent corporation, once boasting record profits and glowing reviews, saw its stock plummet. Investors scrambled to distance themselves, selling shares at a loss as federal investigations spread like fire. By the end of the week, billions in value were gone, erased by revelations no amount of spin could contain. Executives who had grown rich from the operation were led out of their glass towers in handcuffs. Their carefully crafted images of respectability crumbled the moment they were shoved into waiting vans. Cameras caught every step. The public watched, both horrified and vindicated. What had been whispered rumors about shady partnerships and offshore accounts were now exposed with undeniable clarity. The Department of Justice announced indictments that stretched across borders, tying the resort to networks of money launderers in the Cayman Islands and to investors who had profited from silence. Expeditions followed. Names once protected by distance and wealth were suddenly dragged into the light. Flights from the Caribbean delivered suspects who had believed themselves untouchable. Their polished lawyers tried to argue technicalities, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bank transfers, hidden ledgers, and testimony from survivors like Maria Santos tore through their defenses. The illusion of control vanished, replaced with the undeniable truth that justice had finally found them. The collapse of the corporation was not just financial. It was cultural. For years, luxury travel magazines had praised the resort as a symbol of elegance and exclusivity. Now those same outlets issued retractions, their glossy covers marred by shame. Politicians who had accepted campaign donations from executives rushed to return the funds, hoping to escape the backlash. Advocacy groups mobilized, demanding systemic changes to prevent other corporations from following the same path. Through it all, Zara remained steady. She knew the investigations were just beginning, but the sight of once powerful figures answering to the law was a signal that the balance of power could be shifted. Her work had always been about more than exposing individuals. It was about tearing down the structures that allowed exploitation to thrive. Watching executives crumble under questioning, she allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. For the survivors, this was the beginning of justice. For the world, it was a reckoning. No figure embodied the fall more than Chad. Once confident and untouchable, he found himself at the center of ridicule. His live stream, intended to showcase his triumph over Zara, had instead immortalized his arrogance and cruelty. Clips of him mocking her went viral, replayed endlessly alongside the reveal of her true identity. Commentators dissected every smirk, every dismissive gesture, until he became a symbol of everything wrong with entitlement and unchecked privilege. Chad's career collapsed first. His company severed ties, claiming his behavior did not represent their values. Clients withdrew contracts, unwilling to be associated with his name. Invitations to exclusive events dried up. The man who had once strutted through luxury spaces was now barred from them, his membership revoked, his influence erased. His marriage followed. The humiliation of public disgrace proved too much for his wife, who quietly filed for divorce. Court documents revealed years of tension, of arrogance, spilling from public life into private moments. Friends turned away, unwilling to defend him when the evidence of his behavior was broadcast on every screen. Alone, Chad became a figure of pity, his wealth unable to shield him from the consequences of his own actions. The fall cut deeper than reputation. He became a cautionary tale, used in lectures and articles as an example of arrogance punished. High school classrooms debated his choices, college ethics courses studied his downfall, and motivational speakers warned against the hubris that had brought him low. In a world hungry for accountability, Chad's name became shorthand for disgrace. Meanwhile, Devon found a new path. Once timid, often overshadowed, he had stood up for Zara in the face of hostility. That moment changed him. The timid clerk who had once doubted his own voice now recognized its power. He testified during the hearings, his account providing crucial context about how management had enabled abuse. His courage impressed federal investigators, who encouraged him to consider a career in public service. Devon accepted the challenge. Enrolling in criminal justice courses, he dedicated himself to pursuing a life of accountability. He visited survivors, listened to their stories, and realized that justice was not abstract. It was human, personal, and urgent. Where Chad became a symbol of arrogance, punished, Devon became a symbol of growth, of the ordinary citizen who found purpose in standing up against corruption. His path was not easy, but it was filled with meaning, and it placed him firmly on the side of justice. Mrs. Patterson, once dismissed as a meddling elderly guest, emerged as an unlikely national voice. Her quiet persistence in documenting the resort's behavior transformed her into a symbol of bystander courage. When journalists interviewed her, she spoke not with bitterness, but with determination. "I just wrote down what I saw," she explained, holding up her notebook filled with meticulous details. "If ordinary people keep records, if we pay attention, we can hold the powerful accountable." Her words resonated. Communities across the country adopted her example, creating grassroots networks to document abuses of power. Neighborhood groups distributed notebooks, calling them Patterson Journals. Social media platforms spread her message under the hashtag Courage to Witness. In a time when many felt powerless against corruption, Mrs. Patterson reminded them that vigilance was itself a form of strength. Her testimony in federal court carried weight beyond evidence. She represented the moral conscience of the public. Elderly, overlooked, and underestimated, she had refused to look away. Her courage validated Zara's mission, proving that systemic corruption could be confronted not only by agents with badges, but by ordinary people with conviction. Law professors quoted her in lectures. Civic organizations invited her to speak, her frail voice steady as she reminded audiences that the choice between silence and action defined the future of justice. Margaret and Robert, once complicit in the chorus of derision, now confronted their own guilt. They had joined the crowd in dismissing Zara, laughing when they should have listened. The revelation of her identity and the rescue of the survivors forced them to examine their silence. They issued public apologies, not to salvage reputation, but to acknowledge the harm of their complicity. Their journey did not end with words. They volunteered for survivor advocacy groups, using their resources to support shelters and legal aid. At community forums, they admitted their failure and urged others to resist the temptation of mob judgment. Their transformation was imperfect, but it was real. They understood that atonement was not a single act, but a continuous effort, a lifelong commitment to choosing courage over convenience. The consequences rippled outward. Corporations tightened compliance, governments enacted stricter oversight, and communities demanded transparency. Yet beneath the policies and prosecutions, the deeper shift was cultural. The arrogance of Chad, the cowardice of executives, the silence of bystanders, all of it had been dragged into the light. In its place stood survivors who spoke, allies who listened, and citizens who believed in accountability. And still, Mrs. Patterson's role lingered as a reminder of what one ordinary person could do. Schools began teaching her story alongside those of civil rights activists, presenting her notebook as a modern act of resistance. Survivor groups called her a guardian, someone who had kept the flame of truth alive when others tried to snuff it out. Her small spiral pad of observations became an artifact of conscience, housed in a museum exhibit about modern courage. Zara watched the transformation from a distance, knowing her role was not to remain in the spotlight, but to continue her mission. The consequences of the resort's fall were vast, but they were only the beginning. Justice was not a destination, it was a process, and as long as there were systems built on silence, there would be voices like hers and like Mrs. Patterson's ready to break it. 6 months had passed since the raid, yet the shockwaves it created had not subsided. The industry of luxury resorts and corporate tourism was no longer the same. Federal agencies, advocacy groups, and survivor coalitions had forced sweeping reforms, ensuring that the crimes buried within the walls of one resort could never be repeated elsewhere. The change had a name now. Journalists called it the Washington Protocol, after the federal task force that drafted it in the aftermath of Zara's operation. The Washington Protocol required strict independent audits of every luxury hospitality business. It mandated comprehensive background checks for staff, the creation of anonymous whistleblower channels, and specialized training to identify and report human trafficking. More than that, it established a culture of accountability. Resorts and corporations could no longer hide behind glossy brochures and polished advertisements. They were now responsible for the safety and dignity of every guest and every worker who walked through their doors. The reforms stretched further than the hospitality industry. Universities adopted them as case studies, teaching students about the intersection of business ethics, human rights, and systemic corruption. Airlines and cruise lines incorporated the protocols into their own policies. Even small businesses began to apply the principles, encouraged by community groups who saw the Washington Protocol not just as a law, but as a philosophy. The message was clear. Exploitation had no place in modern society, and silence would no longer be tolerated. For survivors, the reforms carried more than symbolic weight. They meant resources, counseling, job placement, and dignity. Maria Santos stood as the most visible example of this transformation. Once trapped and silenced, she now walked through the resort halls not as a victim, but as an assistant manager. She wore her name badge proudly, her voice firm as she supervised staff and guided new hires through training sessions. When guests greeted her, they saw not a survivor defined by trauma, but a leader defined by resilience. Her journey was not easy. At first, the memories returned with every hallway she walked and every door she opened. But therapy, community, and the support of allies like Zara helped her find strength in reclaiming the very place that once caged her. "It does not belong to them anymore," she told a group of new employees during a training session. "It belongs to us now, to the ones who survived, to the ones who will never again be silenced." The applause that followed was not for a manager giving instructions, it was for a woman who had become a symbol of rebirth. The resort itself had changed too. Where secrecy once thrived, transparency now guided operations. Posters displayed hotline numbers, staff received training in multiple languages, security cameras monitored every blind corner. Guests noticed the difference, and many praised it. What had once been a place of hidden cruelty had become an emblem of accountability. And at the center of that transformation stood Maria, proving that healing was possible and that dignity could rise from the ashes of pain. While survivors rebuilt their lives, the echoes of justice reached even the fallen. Chad's name remained infamous, his arrogance replayed in endless clips online. But over time, his story took a different turn. Stripped of wealth and reputation, he had a choice to make. He could vanish into bitterness, or he could attempt redemption. To the surprise of many, he chose the latter. Court-ordered community service initially forced him into speaking engagements about bias, arrogance, and the dangers of privilege. At first, he stumbled through his words, humiliated and resentful. But something shifted as he faced rooms filled with young students, activists, and community members who demanded accountability. Their questions were sharp, their anger unfiltered. He realized he could no longer perform. He had to confront the truth of who he had been. Chad began speaking honestly about his mistakes. He replayed his live stream and admitted the cruelty of his words. He told audiences about the hollow pride that drove him, the blindness that made him laugh at Zara, and the shame that followed when the world saw what he truly was. Slowly, his message shifted from forced repentance to genuine awareness. He no longer excused himself. He warned others not to follow his path. In time, schools invited him not as punishment but as education. His story became part of the curriculum on ethics and accountability. Though many still despised him, some survivors acknowledged his effort. "Redemption does not erase harm," Maria once said when asked about him, "but it matters when someone uses their downfall to teach others not to repeat it." Chad's role remained controversial, but it served a purpose. He became an uncomfortable but undeniable reminder that arrogance could be punished, and that humility could still serve justice. Devon, meanwhile, grew into the purpose he had discovered. He completed his courses in criminal justice, earning respect for his determination and empathy. He joined an organization dedicated to protecting vulnerable communities, investigating labor exploitation and wage theft. His once timid voice became strong, steady, and filled with conviction. At survivor conferences, he introduced himself not as a hero, but as someone still learning. His humility drew others to him. Survivors trusted him, advocates partnered with him, and even federal agents sought his insight. Through Devon's work, countless workers found safety and justice. He credited Zara for showing him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. And whenever he spoke to students, he told them the story of Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who refused to look away. "If she could act, so can we," he said. His journey, like hers, became a living example of what it meant to choose action over silence. Across the nation, corporations trembled under new expectations, and communities felt empowered. The arrogance that once went unchecked was now challenged. The silence that once protected the powerful was now broken. For every Chad who had to fall, there was a Devon who would rise. Together, their stories embodied the consequences and the possibilities born from a single act of courage by a woman everyone had dismissed. For Zara, recognition came in quiet formality. In a closed ceremony attended only by colleagues, she received the CIA's Intelligence Star, an award reserved for those who risked their lives in service of the nation. She accepted it not for herself, but for the women whose voices she had carried from shadows to light. She held the medal in her palm and remembered every name, every face, every story that had once been silenced. After the ceremony, she returned to the place where it all began, the pool. Its waters rippled calmly now, children laughing nearby, families enjoying their vacations. Tourists floated without fear, oblivious to the history under the tiles. Zara stood at the edge, her reflection wavering in the blue, remembering the sting of that day, the laughter, the humiliation, the live stream that sought to erase her dignity. What had once been a wound now stood as a symbol. Mrs. Patterson joined her there, notebook still tucked into her bag. She had become a national figure, invited to conferences, interviewed by journalists. But to Zara, she remained the same elderly woman who had refused to look away. They sat together in the late afternoon sun, speaking softly about survivors' healing, corporations bending under accountability, and communities waking up to the cost of silence. "It started with a laugh at your expense," Mrs. Patterson said, her eyes sharp but kind. "And it ended with the world reminded that dignity is not negotiable." Zara nodded slowly. "Assumptions can destroy lives, but truth can rebuild them. And courage, especially when it comes from those who are overlooked, can change entire systems." She walked the grounds again, not as an operative in disguise, but as someone witnessing transformation. Maria stood at the front desk, instructing her team with calm authority. Guests approached with respect, not pity. Nearby, Devon spoke with students about his new project. Even Chad, humbled, arrived occasionally to sit quietly in the back of community forums, listening instead of mocking. The resort was no longer what it once was. It was no longer defined by secrecy or exploitation. It had become a monument to resilience, a place reclaimed by those who had been silenced. Survivors were not just rebuilding, they were leading. Witnesses were not just present, they were shaping futures. Even those who once stood in complicity, like Margaret and Robert, now used their voices to caution others, urging them not to repeat their cowardice. As Zara stood once more by the pool, she breathed deeply, her reflection merging with the sky above. The journey had scarred her, but it had also shown her something profound: that power built on cruelty can fall, that dignity can rise from ashes, and that the quiet courage of ordinary people, an elderly woman with a notebook, a young man finding his voice, a survivor daring to lead, could shake the foundations of entire systems. The final message of it all spread far beyond the resort. It echoed through courtrooms, classrooms, and living rooms across the country. Power can be corrupted, arrogance can humiliate, but dignity, truth, and courage, when carried forward, can transform not only lives, but legacies.